October 1944. East Prussia. The village of Nemmersdorf stood silent beneath a sky shrouded in smoke. Once golden fields now lay bare, awaiting a different kind of harvest. War hadn't directly touched this land, but its shadow loomed in the stillness, the absence of birdsong, and the distant rumble of artillery from the east. Alexei Petrov moved like a phantom along the forest's edge. The Soviet advance had surged deep into German territory, with his reconnaissance unit leading the charge as the vanguard. His boots sank into the soft earth while he surveyed the nearly deserted village. Experience taught him that civilians remained, clinging to hope, believing that calamity would bypass them. Through his binoculars, he took in Nemmersdorf's layout: the church steeple, clusters of houses, barns bearing silent witness. Smoke spiraled from a few chimneys, hinting at those who couldn't or wouldn't flee. Beyond lay dark smudges of artillery smoke, where the Wehrmacht battled a desperate rearguard action against the Red Army. Beautiful, isn't it? Lieutenant Barkov appeared beside him, striking a match for his cigarette. Peaceful, like nothing's happened. Alexei lowered his binoculars. It won't stay peaceful. No. Barkov's smile faltered. It won't. The gravity of their circumstances hung heavy between them. Alexei had witnessed the aftermath when Soviet forces took German villages. 2 years of Nazi atrocities had ignited an insatiable thirst for retribution that no commander could temper. They'd seen their homes burn, families suffer. Now that anguish marched westward, village by village. Orders were clear: secure the area, neutralize resistance. What followed was spoken of only in hushed tones, drunken boasts, and nightmares that haunted men's sleep. Once youthful, Alexei's face had sharpened into angles and shadows. 3 years of war had hollowed him out, leaving a man stuck between duty and conscience. His pale blue eyes scanned the serene scene, already envisioning its violent transformation. The wind shifted, carrying the low rumble of tanks. Their column neared. Nemmersdorf would feel their weight by nightfall. The silence was soon to be shattered. Tragedy awaited its turn. Alexei descended the ridge, treading a path toward the village edge. The sound of artillery grew closer, a war drum signaling the inevitable. That echo reverberated through the deserted farms leading toward Nemmersdorf. In one farmhouse the door hung askew. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light piercing the gloom. The owners had likely fled hours or days before. A pot remained cold on the stove, a table set for an unfinished meal. Alexei glided through like a specter, witnessing lives halted. In what had been a child's room, a small wooden horse lay in the mud scattered across the floor. Kneeling, he picked it up, brushing off the dirt. Once vivid red, only faint traces of color remained, like fading memories. Soldier or spy? Barkov's voice startled him from the doorway. We moved to the village center. Command wants assessments. Alexei pocketed the horse instinctively. Resistance reported? None yet. The Wehrmacht abandoned these people to their fate. Barkov sneered. Just like the fascists. Use them, then leave them. Outside, raindrops began to fall, darkening the road to Nemmersdorf's heart. Alexei tightened his coat around him, feeling the wooden horse press against his ribs. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked and went silent. The village remained unaware that its name would soon evoke horror. Its streets would bear witness to events even veterans of Stalingrad would find hard to forget, its walls absorbing screams that echoed long after the war's end. Alexei walked on, caught between the brute force of Soviet vengeance and his waning humanity. In moments he would have to decide which would shatter first. A church bell tolled, then fell silent, the village sensing the inevitable. The sound mingled with smoke and rain. Around Alexei, fellow scouts emerged from the tree line, moving forward with practiced ease. Their faces were masks, some eager, others indifferent, all shaped by war's burdens. They had seen comrades suffer, liberated camps, and found villages where civilians were punished for their perceived ties. Now they carried those memories into Nemmersdorf, where new tales awaited. The artillery grew quiet. The rain intensified. In that brief stillness, Alexei's hand closed around the wooden horse, its edges sharp against his palm. A small remnant of innocence in a world long stripped of its meaning. The chill of October air followed Alexei down the narrow cellar steps, his boot heels scraping on stone worn smooth over generations. He moved cautiously, rifles slung across his back, a soldier's instinct guiding each step into the darkness below. Distant artillery thunder punctuated the silence. War was approaching Nemmersdorf. The tip of Soviet vengeance was already at its doorstep. His eyes adjusted slowly. In the far corner, a family huddled together. Father, mother, 3 children. Their eyes reflected the meager light that managed to filter through the ceiling boards. Pure, unfiltered terror. The man raised a trembling hand as if it could shield them from what Soviet soldiers had inflicted on villages before. What would you have done in Alexei's position? Faced with fearful individuals who viewed you as a monster, would you show mercy or yield to the tide of vengeance? Alexei's hand moved, not to his weapon, but to his satchel. The family flinched in unison, a single organism bound by fear. He extracted half a loaf of dark bread, its crust hard yet soft within. Kneeling slowly, he placed it on the dirt floor between them, a small bridge across an impossible divide. "Essen," he whispered in broken German. "Eat." The youngest child, perhaps 5, stared at the bread with hollow eyes. War had aged her beyond her years. The mother murmured something and pulled her closer. No one moved towards the offering. Alexei tore off a piece and ate it, a gesture meant to prove the bread wasn't harmful, not a trick. Something softened in the father's expression. Not trust, but perhaps a flicker of humanity where he expected cruelty. Boots stomped on wooden floors overhead. Russian voices rang out, guttural and harsh. Alexei's comrades were searching through the house. Glass shattered nearby. A woman's distant cry echoed, that they all heard. The sound hung in the cellar's stale air. The middle child, a boy of about 10, began to cry silently, tears tracing tracks through the grime on his face. Alexei felt something twist within him. He had seen the horrors in other villages, heard what his comrades did upon finding civilians. "Still," he whispered, raising a finger to his lips. "Quiet." More footsteps echoed overhead. Someone called Alexei's name. He stood quickly and approached the stairs, glancing back. The mother finally reached for the bread, breaking it into 5 careful pieces. Their eyes met, hers filled with confusion, his with the gravity of their situation. He gestured to the far corner. "Hide there. Stay silent." He couldn't promise safety. This small act of mercy might mean nothing by morning. Emerging into the cold October air felt different now. Alexei found Sergeant Volkov in the tidy kitchen, his eyes narrowed, a hand resting on his holster. "Finding treasures in the basement, Alexei?" he asked, his voice slick with implication. "Nothing," Alexei replied, shutting the cellar door with his boot. "Just rats and empty jars." Volkov studied him for a moment too long before smiling, though it didn't reach his eyes. "The colonel says we make an example of this place. For Leningrad. For our families." Alexei nodded, understanding the weight of those words. Outside, the village square filled with Soviet soldiers. Some were already drunk on schnapps. Others checked ammunition, preparing. Distant cries from the eastern edge signaled that advance units had begun their grim work. Alexei looked back at the house and the sealed cellar door. He had given them bread but not safety, not protection from the inevitable. His small mercy felt hollow, a crumb before a storm. He followed Volkov into the dusk, the houses of Nemmersdorf silhouetted against a burning horizon. Behind him, hidden in darkness, 5 people shared torn pieces of a soldier's bread, unaware that their fate had already been sealed by men burdened by their own ghosts. Tomorrow, this village would become a name whispered in horror. But for now, in one dim cellar, mercy lingered. Fragile as bread crust, temporary as silence, crumbling beneath the weight of forthcoming vengeance. The cellar door closed behind Alexei as he emerged. the weight of what lay ahead settling on him like winter frost. The bread he'd given, a small mercy in this storm, felt hollow now. Through the morning mist they came, not as liberators, but as bringers of a long, festering reckoning, birthed from too much loss. The first shots shattered the silence, echoing like thunder across an otherwise calm sky. Though accustomed to rifle fire, Alexei flinched. This was different. The village erupted into chaos. Doors splintered under heavy boots, windows shattered, littering the floors where children had once played. For Moscow, for Stalingrad. The battle cry reverberated between houses that had stood for generations. But this was no battle. It was the release of something darker. Vengeance masked as justice, worn by the very uniform Alexei himself wore. A woman dashed by, terror etched on her face. A child clutched to her chest. Behind her, 3 soldiers laughed as if chasing a rabbit through a field. Alexei stepped forward, mouth opening to speak, but words faltered as an explosion rocked the street, sending tiles cascading from roofs like autumn leaves. "Please," someone pleaded in broken Russian from a doorway. "We are not soldiers." The response was silence, quickly followed by the butt of a rifle. Alexei averted his gaze, but that sound, bone against wood, then bone against stone, would haunt his dreams. From the village square, Alexei watched as history inscribed itself in sorrow across Nemmersdorf. Men were dragged from homes, lined against walls. Women pulled by their hair into barns where their cries merged with the wind. His comrades moved like phantoms, seeking retribution for every village burned, every family starved. An old man stood in the street, arms outstretched to halt the tide of rage. A young lieutenant, barely old enough to shave, leveled his pistol. "This is not war," Alexei whispered. "This is something else." The lieutenant turned, as if hearing Alexei's thoughts. Their eyes locked across a divide wider than the Eastern Front. The young man smiled, emptiness behind his gaze. "This is exactly what war is," he said, and fired. Alexei's boots felt rooted to the cold earth as flames danced on the village church's thatched roof. The heat reached him before the sound, a whoosh of oxygen feeding fire. Toys lay scattered in dirt like lost memories, a wooden horse, a doll with one eye missing. "We found a cellar full," a sergeant laughed, passing by with a bottle. "Not hiding anymore." Alexei's hand moved to his sidearm, fingers trembling. The family, the bread, the promise of safety. Had they believed him? Had they stayed put? He ran, boots slipping in mud darkened by more than rain. The house stood as he remembered, the cellar doors ajar like a screaming mouth. Inside, darkness. Then, shapes. Then, understanding. What broke in Alexei was not sudden, but the final fracture of something long splintering, humanity crumbling under too heavy a weight. Outside, soldiers had cornered a German officer, making a game of his ending. Their laughter mingled with the crackling flames consuming half the village. Night fell early, smoke blotting out the autumn sun. In darkness, Nemmersdorf morphed into a vision of hell realized. Bodies hung from barn doors, arranged in morbid patterns. Messages etched in skin, awaiting discovery when the Germans counterattacked. Alexei stood alone as a roof collapsed in a shower of embers, illuminating the square in terrifying clarity. His shadow stretched long, a dark figure against flames painting the world in shades of vengeance. "This is what they did to us," a senior officer said beside him, vodka on his breath. He gestured at the destruction. "We're just speaking to them in the language they taught us." Alexei remained silent. The officer clapped him on the shoulder and moved away to collect remnants before advancing. Tomorrow, other villages awaited. This shadow war would continue, behind the line marked on maps. In the silence between gunshots, Alexei heard unexpected soft crying. Behind a half-collapsed wall, movement. A child, no more than 7, eyes wide, reflected the burning world, their gazes locked. Alexei saw himself, not as he was but as he appeared, a monster in Soviet green, part of the nightmare engulfing this place. The moment stretched between them like a thread about to snap. And, in that moment, Alexei made another choice. Dawn breaks over Nemmersdorf. But no light could cleanse what had transpired. The village lay open like a wound that would never heal, buildings torn apart as if by some force of destruction. Smoke still rose from smoldering ruins, the only movement in a landscape frozen in devastation. From above, it might have seemed peaceful, the silence replacing yesterday's chaos. But the earth had absorbed too much suffering to ever be clean again. Alexei moved through the village alone, his footsteps echoing against the cobblestones. His comrades had already moved on to the next target, leaving him behind with orders to secure the area. But there was nothing left to secure. Only memories remained, their presence heavy in the air, accusing with their silence. He stepped around bodies left where they had fallen, old men with their hands still raised in surrender, women whose final expressions would haunt him until his own end came. The wind carried the odor of destruction, combining with the morning mist to create a fog that seemed to blur the boundary between life and death. "Is this what we fought for?" he whispered, his words disappearing into the void. In what remained of a family home, Alexei found a small leather shoe, perfectly preserved amid the destruction. Its size made his heart ache, a child's shoe, polished and cared for, now ownerless. He held it in his hands, turning it over as if it might contain answers to questions he dared not fully form. Nearby lay a torn dress, once blue, now soiled and tattered. He couldn't bring himself to touch it. These weren't the spoils of war the others had gathered. These were reminders of lives extinguished, like candles in a storm. Before the war, Alexei had been a schoolteacher from a small village, not unlike this one. He had believed in the cause, in driving back those who had invaded his homeland. But revenge had transformed into something unrecognizable here, something he couldn't reconcile with the man he thought he was. His hands trembled as he set the shoe down. They were clean. He hadn't fired his weapon during the tragedy, but he felt the weight of complicity spreading through him like poison. He had watched. He had not stopped it. The family he had saved in the cellar, had they escaped, or had someone else found them after he left? "We are no longer men," he said to the empty room. "We have become the embodiment of what we despised." In the village square, where days ago children might have played, the bodies of women had been arranged in a distressing display. Some were positioned in ways that spoke of final humiliations before death. This wasn't combat. It was an affront to humanity. Alexei closed his eyes but could not shut out the images. A distant explosion shook the ground beneath him, the rumble of artillery fire continuing its relentless march. The war ground on, insatiable, consuming villages like this one, turning homes into memorials. Another Nemmersdorf was happening somewhere at this very moment. Alexei knelt in the dirt, picked up a handful of soil, and let it filter through his fingers. This ground had witnessed it all, the life before, the horror during, the emptiness after. It would remember when humans chose to forget. He found himself at the edge of town where the family had hidden in the cellar. The door hung ajar. Signs of struggle marred the stairs. He couldn't bring himself to descend, to confirm what he already knew. His one act of mercy had been washed away by the tide of retaliation that followed. Another explosion, closer now. The front line shifting. Soon opposing forces would return, uncover what had happened here, and their rage would fuel new tragedies. The cycle continuing, a serpent devouring its own tail. Alexei stood at a crossroads, the road east leading back to his unit, to more villages like this one, the road west toward uncertainty and desertion. To follow orders or conscience, to continue as part of this machine of retribution, or to find another way. The wind carried the sound of engines. Someone was coming. In his pocket, his fingers closed around the bread crust he had saved from his rations, the same bread he had offered to the family. It was hard now, inedible. A reminder of a moment when he had chosen to be compassionate in a place where humanity was being systematically extinguished. The engines grew louder. Time had run out. Alexei made his choice. Night descended over the remnants of Nemmersdorf, casting a heavy gloom over the destruction. The fires had mostly extinguished, leaving only glowing embers amid the ruins. Alexei trudged back to the makeshift camp where Soviet troops had gathered, each step feeling increasingly burdensome. His boots sank into mud stained by more than rain. The weight of what he had seen bore down on him, a palpable load that threatened to sink him into the earth alongside the altered villagers. Before he saw it, laughter reached him, not nervous or relieved, but joyous. It cut through the dark air with an unsettling intensity. As he neared the clearing, the scene unfolded like something from another realm, disconnected from the tragedy they had undergone mere hours before. His comrades surrounded the fires, passing bottles among them. Some perched on crates salvaged from abandoned homes, others sprawled on the ground, their uniforms still stained by the day's events. The warm glow of fire and vodka rendered their faces into masks of false joy. Steam from their breath mingled with cigarette smoke, blending with the lingering scent of smoldering buildings. "To victory!" a lieutenant shouted, raising a bottle from a nearby cellar. Cheers erupted in response. "To Russia!" cried another. "To revenge!" a deeper voice interjected. The words hung in the air, almost tangible. Revenge. Was that the essence of today's actions? Alexei glanced at his hands. Despite his attempts to wash them, remnants of the day lingered, blood from foes and innocents alike. "Alexei, come join us." Someone beckoned, noticing him lingering at the firelight's edge. "The hero returns." He felt no heroism, just a ghost observing the living. Still, he stepped forward, accepting a tin cup. The vodka seared his throat as he sipped, keeping his expression neutral. "Did you see that woman flee?" A corporal with a fresh scar chuckled, gesturing animatedly. "Like a wild beast chasing her." Laughter rippled around the fire, unsettling against the cool night. "I confronted 3 behind the church," boasted another soldier, eyes glazed with drink. "One begged in Russian, can you believe it?" Laughter erupted again, more dark stories revealing a sinister side of humanity, while a knot twisted in Alexei's stomach. A young soldier, barely 18, nudged him. "I couldn't do it at first," he confessed. "Then I thought of Leningrad. My sister. What happened to her?" His eyes flickered with pain and determination. "It becomes easier after the first time." That notion horrified Alexei, not the act itself, but that it could shift from unthinkable to routine so quickly. Individuals who once mourned could soon compete in enduring or inflicting suffering, shedding their humanity like an old coat. "What about you, Alexei?" a sergeant called. "How many did you confront today?" All eyes focused on him, waiting. The pressure of their gaze made him tremble slightly. "I lost count," he finally replied, the words feeling hollow. Nods of approval followed, their misinterpretation of his silence as stoic strength, ignoring the horror within. "That family in the cellar," a soldier started, "the one with the daughter." Alexei's tension surged. Had they found the family he'd tried to spare? Near the blacksmith's. "You should have seen them plead," the soldier continued. "The father offered us everything, as if that could atone." Relief washed over him, soon replaced by disgust. Relieved it was not his family, sickened that he felt such while others suffered. As night deepened, tales grew grimmer, alcohol loosening tongues. Men would return home as fathers, yet shared experiences with casual pride, as though recounting fishing stories. Suddenly Alexei stood, his drink spilling into the dirt. "Where are you going?" came a voice. "Patrol," he replied, seeking an escape. He walked until the firelight faded, sounds of cheer dwindling. In the shadow of Nemmersdorf, he paused. Ragged breaths escaped him, his body rebelling against the day's memories. Was this justice? Was this their goal? He had enlisted to fight soldiers, not harm the vulnerable. Yet here he stood, feeling complicit, weighed down by the association of his uniform. Dawn broke over Nemmersdorf, casting shadows on what was once a vibrant village. The disarray of buildings lay under a gray, ash-colored sky, mirroring the smoke still spiraling from charred timbers. A haunting stillness filled the area. Not even birds dared to sing. Alexei stood alone on the edge of the village square. His uniform hung loosely on him, a sign of how profoundly changed he felt. Behind him, the faint sounds of his comrades' revelry drifted on the wind, laughter more feral than joyful. He could not join them, not after what he had witnessed. The village seemed to whisper its profound absence of life. A broken cartwheel, a doll with stuffing hanging out in a puddle, and a door swinging gently from a single hinge, creaking softly in the wind, evoked a haunting melancholy. In the distance, artillery fire resumed. Dull thuds resonated against the horizon. The war continued its relentless march, indifferent to the devastation it had left. Alexei knelt beside a small wooden cross driven into the earth. It was not a grave, but a hasty memorial, possibly made by the same hands that placed a wilting wildflower beside it. He gently touched the petals before rising. "I should have stopped them," he whispered, voice trembling. The words fell into the silence, absorbed like rain into dry ground. He remembered the names of those who led the worst actions. He recognized their laughter as they took civilians from their homes, posed beside their horrific deeds like hunters with trophies. His comrades. One step followed another as Alexei walked away from the village, his pace mechanical yet gradually more deliberate. With each footfall, something hardened within him. They called it revenge, but that suggested justice, balance. This was something far more troubling. He touched the small notebook in his greatcoat pocket. He began documenting names, descriptions, times, everything he had witnessed, a record for himself, a promise written in ink. Halfway up the hill overlooking the village, Alexei paused and turned back. From this distance, the horrors were masked. Nemmersdorf appeared almost serene, the devastation visible only to those who had experienced it. The wind shifted, bringing the distant sounds of his company preparing to move. They would go further into East Prussia, toward more villages, more opportunities for what they justified as justice. Alexei's expression had shifted overnight. The uncertainty in his eyes was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. He was no longer just following orders. He had seen beyond the propaganda and made a choice. Justice weighed heavily in his thoughts. What justice was there for the woman he found cruelly treated? For the children whose lives were cut short? For the family he tried to save, only to hear their cries later? The sound of artillery fire echoed closer now. The front was moving. Soon German forces would advance, using these tragic events for their purposes. The cycle would continue. Hatred, breeding hatred. Alexei turned away from Nemmersdorf one last time, checking the weight of his pistol at his hip. There would be more villages, more opportunities, and a need for vigilance. One man against the tide of vengeance. Daunting, but necessary. As he rejoined his unit, Sergei clapped him on the shoulder, asking if he was ready for the next target in Gumbinnen. Alexei met his gaze, seeing the empty anticipation in his eyes. He nodded once, his jaw set. "I'm ready." Behind them, Nemmersdorf faded into the fog, the tragedy slipping from the memories of those responsible. But not from Alexei's. The names in his notebook remained a vow to the unheard, to those whose stories risked being lost in the chaos of war. Justice would come, perhaps not through courts or history, but through him. The trucks rumbled to life, and the company moved forward, toward new battles, new choices. In the silence left behind, only the departed remained to bear witness.